Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to the NRW. I'm your host today, Rob Medina, and I thank you all very much for joining me here today because today I'm going to be reviewing the movie Outlaw's Buckle. I actually saw this movie for the first time last year. I saw it on Tubi where it's available right now for free with ads, of course. But when I saw this movie, I remember thinking I liked the film. I didn't love it, but I remember liking it. And out of all the films that I've come across with Brett Bellman, who wrote and directed this movie through the B22 production company, this is the one that I actually went back to the least. And this is a film that I actually did like, but for whatever reason, I never went back to watching it more consistent like I've done with Rodeo Thief, Buckskin, Meteor, Operation Overlord, what else? Honor Among Thieves, Copper Bill, just to name a few. So for whatever reason, as I said before, I just don't know why I never went back to watching this film. I think at the time I might have only seen it maybe twice, three times, if that. I can't recall, but it's something within that range. And then it came out on DVD rather recently. As of this recording, I think less than 2 weeks ago, and I have a copy of the film right here on DVD. And, you know, I'm a big fan of B22 films. I'm a big fan of Brett Bellman, and whatever new films they're having coming down the pipeline, I'm going to be buying those films. And I didn't realize until then when I got home after buying Outlaw's Buckle that I actually have a few of their films here. So I have, as you already saw here, Outlaw's Buckle, Operation Overlord, Meteor, and then, of course, Buckskin. And these are the films that I've got in order. So this was first, Meteor was second, Operation Overlord third, and then, of course, Outlaw Buckle being fourth. And as I mentioned before, I plan on adding more of the films into my collection here because I still have a big physical collection of media. But the point I'm trying to get at here is that when I bought the movie on DVD, that's really where I started watching the film more consistently for the purposes of this review, because I noticed that the first time I saw the film, which I think I hadn't seen the film since last year. I can't recall when it was, but it has been a while back. I haven't seen the movie again. There were a lot more things that I did notice this, I would think is probably the third or fourth time I saw the film, that I didn't really catch before my first, second, possibly third viewing when I saw it last year. That definitely gave me a different perspective on the film, especially after I had a conversation with Brett Bellman on my show for this the second time he was on You're So Cool with Rob Medina, where he gave some more insight about what they had gone through to make this movie. And I'll share some insight about what that was, because it definitely did change my perception of how I looked at the film, knowing what I know now with what he was able to share on the show. And I realized that when he had also said that this, out of all the films that he's done under B22, this is the one that gets the most hate. And I actually happened to check out the reviews. I didn't check out the reviews last year, but I did check them out before I started the recording here for Outlaw Buckle. That there was a lot of hate towards this film that I realized that I don't think was ever warranted to begin with here. I'm not the one who's going to say, you know, every film, there are some films that deserve a lot of hate, and I don't necessarily believe that. There are some films I just absolutely hate for one reason or another, but even then I'm not going to go as far as shitting on the movie in that respect. But the shit that I read on the IMDb reviews, they were just pretty harsh, like really, really brutal stuff. And I'll be honest, I don't agree with any of those criticism at all. I mean, there are certain things that certain people did highlight that I did agree were valid as far as what their issues were with the film. But a lot of it's just simply this movie's boring, it sucks, and terrible acting and so on and so forth. And I don't agree with that notion at all whatsoever. But of course, I'll be getting into my review with this and sharing my thoughts. But I want to point out that I'm not going to be getting into any spoilers with this review, with this film at all, because again, this is one of the situations where I think that if you watch it for and enjoy for what it is, I think you'll actually appreciate how the story unfolds, especially after learning what it took to make the film, which I know to some people may not even care, but I do. And I think this really does give me a different perspective at what they were intending on doing, what they were presented, and what they were going to work out to get this final cut here. So I'll get in a little bit to the plot synopsis. No spoilers, of course, my positives, my negatives, and then my rating. A deadly game of cat and mouse unfolds at a small-town Texas jail when Deputy Michael Rollins' quiet weekend is interrupted by a couple of unexpected visitors. Taking shelter from a worsening storm, Deputy Belle Adams pulls in with a serial killer who she is transporting to another jail. When the storm takes out the power, the killer seizes the opportunity to escape within the building, leaving the deputies to find him before he strikes again. And that right there is the film in a nutshell. So now let's get into my positives. What's unique about my first positive with this movie, it actually has to do with what I've learned from my conversation with Brett about what they were trying to make the film turn out to be, and then what ended up happening for a lot of things that they intended on doing didn't work out for what reasons, which I'll get into here in a bit. I really did appreciate the overall story that we were getting with this film. But here's the thing I'm going to point out too, because one of the things that I noticed in a lot of the critiques about this movie that people were saying about the film was that it's a very boring movie. It's nothing happens, and it's just the story was awful and whatever. I don't agree with that at all. The thing that I really did appreciate about this story is that, to me, it showcases what, if it's the best way to say this here, that what life is really like for most people under those circumstances. So, for example, in the movie opens up where Tom Hallam, who is amazing in the movie, if anything that Tom Hallam does, I know he's going to deliver 100% no matter what. And I'll talk about his performance in a bit as well. But Tom Hallam's character, who he plays Rollins in this movie, he's sweeping up the floor and then just tired of it. And then he ends up going down the hallway, and he's trying to get into a door in this hallway in the facility that he's working at. Pulls out a gun in an attempt to try to break through the door, but he doesn't actually do it. I guess he's trying to keep himself entertained. Something about that, for me personally, really appealed to me, because I honestly believe that that's what some people would actually do in real life, and showcasing a lot of those in what most people's eyes may seem very mundane. Something about that seemed rather appealing for me personally, especially the way the shots are look as far as the lighting is concerned under the cinematography from Anthony Gutierrez, who I thought did a phenomenal job with this movie. But the thing is that something about that approach, where showcasing the everyday mundane thing that a person will go through, in this case in a jail facility that has virtually no action at all, and there's nobody really there outside from himself and one other prisoner, I thought that worked really well, at least for me personally. And I've seen the movie now up to this point, I think maybe 5-6 times, if that, but I did appreciate that a lot more each and every time I started watching the film again, especially after buying the movie on DVD. That worked for me. One of those reasons is because of Tom Hallam. Tom Hallam is an incredible actor. And the thing that I wanted to point out about Tom is that Brett had shared that he had taken some inspiration from the character that Sylvester Stallone played in the movie Copland, which I think is a truly underrated movie. Really, really good film. One of Stallone's best movies ever done, in my opinion. Easily in the top 10. But that character that Stallone played was more or less kind of a loose inspiration for the character of Rollins that Tom Hallam's playing, to the point where even Hallam put on a little bit more weight for this character, which I did notice. He did look a little bit heavier, not heavy like Stallone did, where he put on like a lot of weight for the character he played in Copland. But in this movie, though, you can certainly see the added weight, and it definitely did have an effect on the character's look that I thought worked very effectively for this film. You can see that this is a man who is very much kind of plateaued in life, if that makes any sense, and he's looking for something to do. And seeing those little subtle things of what he's trying to do to keep himself entertained. Because there's one part of the movie where I mentioned before about the hallway scene where looks like he's trying to break through, just I guess to keep himself entertained. There's a part of the film where he's trying to get something out of a vending machine. It was like $1 or something, and the money he put in apparently didn't go through properly, because the thing did not come down, which we've all experienced before. He's shaking down the machine and it's still not coming down. Then he's pulling out a gun, pointing the gun at this vending machine, and you're actually, at least I did, I certainly wonder, is he really going to shoot the vending machine for this? That's the thing about the film that really kept my attention, and those little subtle things certainly did help me be invested with what's going on in the story. And a lot of it does have to do with Tom Hallam. Those little things that he was doing, I thought worked very well. I don't know if that's something that Brett had written for the character to do, or if that's something that Tom Hallam had come up with to try to do something very interesting for himself, to tell this story of what this character is going through and what he has to kind of do to keep himself from going crazy, being isolated, because the film does take place during a pretty severe thunderstorm where literally everything is shut down for the most part. And then something along the way comes about where it changes the momentum of the movie, where we get introduced to a character by the name of Adams, if I'm not mistaken, played by Rachel G. Whittle, who I think is really good in the film. This is an actress that I'm going to point out here that I think a lot of people should keep an eye out for, because her performance in this movie, in my opinion, really does keep the film together. And I'm not gonna get into any spoilers here for this review, but what happens at the end of the movie, her delivery of what she has been presented here sells the film, in my opinion. Really does do the film justice, and understanding what the whole purpose of this film was, the whole journey that this character is going through. But there's also a side of that story as well too, that I'm going to get into my negatives here, which a lot of it I believe does have to do with the fact of the limited time they actually had in making the film, which is an incredible thing that I think at the same time it's really wonderful and quite amazing how they pulled this off here with the limited amount of time, which I'm going to point here with my positives. But the point that I'm going to get at here is that the chemistry between Rachel and Tom Hallam working together on screen, it does work very well. They have good chemistry on screen together. I think that they have this wonderful aspect to their relationship where they don't trust each other, but in a lot of ways, kind of by default, due to the circumstances, they, at least in this case, Rollins, played by Hallam, who is more or less willing to take the risk of having her bring a prisoner that she was intending on to get over to a location, but because of the storm, she was stopped in her track, found the nearest facility, and brought the prisoner there, so that way they can stay the night, wait for the storm to pass through, and then be able to pick up and go from there the following morning. So those little things I think worked effectively, and why things happened the way they did. Again, without getting into spoilers here, but there's a reason why these two are there. But the thing that I think I found really interesting about her character as well too is that as the story progresses, I started noticing after I think the third or fourth time I saw the film, where I didn't catch it before, and upon repeat viewing, I noticed that those little subtle things that she was doing that kind of more or less gave away what her intentions really were. And when you pay attention to those little details, you come to find out that all the clues were right in front of you the entire time, and more, if that makes any sense. And I'm sure if you watch the film, especially if you watch it again upon second and third repeat viewing, you'll understand what I'm pointing out here. But a lot of it does have to do with Rachel's delivery in that character's performance, and I thought she did a really good job with this movie. Here's another actor that I want to highlight here that is a B-22 veteran in Andy, I think his last name is Aerosmith. Aerosmith, I think I pronounced his last name. If I messed it up, I apologize. This is an actor that I've noticed before, that I've seen before in the other films that he's worked with on Brett and B-22 Productions. I never really took time to really consider how good of an actor he really is. Like, and this performance really won me over with what he's able to pull off here, because the character that he plays in this movie, I had to write down here because I'll forget. His name is Russell. I think this character, when you first get introduced to him, pretty much sets the tone about what is to be expected of this movie. When you first see him, I love the fact that he has this very menacing look about him, and it is very believable. He pulls it off very well, and he doesn't say a word, but he has little quirks about him too along the way. And there's an aura about him as well too, that he has a very unpredictable side of him that you haven't seen yet, but you know it's there. And it's just a ticking time bomb that's just building up, that I think he does a really good job in his delivery of that character. What I've also come to find out too in my conversation with Brett is that on the second day of shooting, Andy had revealed to Brett, and I'm sure this is not going to be top secret news here because it's already out now, but he had shared in that conversation that Andy had told Brett that he had gotten a part in the new Lord of the Rings series, which at the time they were shooting, I believe, in New Zealand. So he had to leave literally the next day. So all the things that they intended on shooting with Andy, I'm assuming in the coming days here, had to be done all in that one day. So normally, I know that the guys over at B-22 do their productions for 10 hours, something like that. And this time around, they had to do it all in 12, possibly 14, 15 hours to get all the scenes they need with Andy before he had to leave, I think, to New Zealand the following day. So for them to be able to pull that off, I got to give them a lot of credit, because I honestly didn't notice certain things along the way, having learned that now, that it fit very well with how they were able to pull up the story with this character. Although I did have an issue of how it was handled, which I'm not going to reveal, but I definitely will point out my negatives here. But the way the character was used in this movie, in my opinion, worked well. But a lot of it, again, has to do with how Andy delivers his character's performance here, because he's fantastic in the film. There's a certain craziness about this guy that you really definitely bring to the film, that he's just a ticking time bomb. In a lot of ways, he kind of reminded me of Charles Manson. He had that look about him that was very reminiscent of Charles Manson, which I thought maybe was intended to be that way, or if it just happened to work out that way, considering the look that Andy had for this part. But either way, that look certainly did help out, and Andy's performance in you getting introduced to the character did a really good job in delivering that, in my opinion. One other actor, whose name I forget right now here, but he plays a character of Jelly in this movie. Now, here's the thing. I'm not mixed about him. I actually like the character a lot, but I do know that there are going to be some people who will think that character is useless and probably not going to be very funny. I like the guy. I thought he was pretty funny. He definitely does bring a side of comedy in the film that, a likeness to the movie, where the film has this build up to it, where you're seeing how things take time to get to one place to the next, and then once he comes to the picture, it's kind of like a change of pace, where the film becomes a little bit more humorous, but it's not humorous that's being taken out of place, I think, in my opinion. Although I will point out too that despite the jokes that this character does say, which I thought were actually kind of funny, it can come across rather cheesy. I'm not saying that the actor in performing that character of Jelly didn't do a good job. I'm not saying that at all, but he definitely does have this awkwardness about him that I think some people might kind of take the wrong way, and saying that he's kind of an annoying character. And I don't think he was at all by any means. The overall story in itself, again, without really getting to spoilers here, this film does have to do with a buckle, an outlaw's buckle, who apparently is a legend. There's a whole story about him that you get to learn about the film here, and his buckle is worth a lot of money, like a ton of money. And that's kind of the focus of the story as you learn along the way, and you start to realize who's telling the truth, who's not. So that sense of like mystery and thriller aspect of the film definitely did work for the movie, that I thought kept me really honestly entertained. I really did enjoy that in that aspect of the film. I'm going to point out another thing too about the directing under Brett Beman, and also the cinematography work of Anthony Gutierrez, because quite frankly, this is actually a really beautifully shot film. I'm going to kind of point out the mixed aspect about this part that I want to highlight about what both Brett and Anthony have done with this film, and giving it a really, really good looking, a beautiful looking film, I have to say. I have a feeling that the way that they intended on shooting the film, if given more time, because the thing I forgot to mention earlier, which I kind of hinted at it, was that there was a snowstorm that had occurred around the time the production began. And what they intended on shooting for a 9-day production ended up having to be done in 4 days. So this movie was done in 4 days. So for everything to be done the way that it turned out in this final cut, I think worked out really well for the most part, I would say. But the fact that due to the limitations, I'm not sure that if a lot of it had to do with them having to just make a quick decision, okay, we're going to have to shoot like this now, where they probably had a little more time with given the full 9 days for them to be able to decide on how to set up the shots more properly with those preparations in place. But considering the circumstance here, I think a lot of those decisions were kind of made on the spot. And if that's the case here, they've done a really good job in setting up the shots and allowing for the camera to sit still to be able to build more or less that suspension and wondering what's going on. I think that worked pretty effectively for the movie. So, in the way that the film looks as well too, I think Anthony did a really good job with this, with his cinematography in this movie. If I were to say, if there was like what's the best way I can say this here? If there's a film that I could point out to that most people would probably overlook, I would say look at this film, because I know that, because Brett said this before too, that this is one of his least favorite films he's ever done. I understand why. I really do. I saw what he didn't like about the film, and it is glaring. I'm not going to deny that as far as what those flaws were. But despite that, the way the film turned out and how it ended, I thought worked very well. I'm going to point out about another movie too that I've talked before about with Brett, which is the film called Copper Bill, which is a really good film up until the last 10 minutes. And some things had occurred during the production that forced Brett and everyone else involved to have to change the ending. And the ending that we got in the film and for Copper Bill didn't work that well at all. But considering what had occurred with Outlaw's buckle, and the short amount of time they had and the changes they had to make and the things they had to leave out as a result of not being able to go the full 9 days to shoot this film, I think the way the film turned out under those circumstances, this film was much better than Copper Bill in that respect. Copper Bill, I still think is the better movie up until the last 10 minutes, but the way this film turned out, it actually made more sense. It seemed very cohesive and it's very consistent for the most part on how the story started and where it then ended at the obviously at the end. So I believe that all the hurdles that everyone was going through at that time, they've accomplished, I think, in my mind, in trying to get a good film made. And I know that Brett doesn't really necessarily like the film all that much. And again, as I said before, I do understand those reasons why. But despite that, I still think the film turned out pretty well. I'm trying to see what other positives I can point out here too about this film that comes to mind here, because there's actually quite a few things that I did want to point out, but that's kind of more in that spoiler territory, which I don't want to get into here because I do really want you guys to check out the film, because I actually want you guys to go buy the movie and buy all B-22 films for that matter. So as far as my positive concern, I think this will be the end of it here. So now let's get into my negatives. With the negatives I'm going to point out here, you have to understand that a lot of the things that I did have problems with the movie, I've come to realize are really because of what Brett and everyone else involved with the production had to deal with, where they had to make decisions more or less at the last minute to be able to tell the story and get the film done in a short span of time that they've had to complete the project here. So a lot of those flaws, in my opinion, did come from that. And I remember the first time I saw the movie that I liked where it was going, and then a lot of things kind of felt a little uneven for me, even though it was still consistent across the board, but certain things just didn't seem to get spliced together as well as I thought they could have turned out. And then when I learned what had happened, I'm like, oh, okay, well now it makes more sense for me, and I could see what had occurred that for the film to turn out the way that it did. But one glaring thing I want to point out here with this review, with this film, is that I'm going to talk about the character of what's his name, Russell, played by Andy Aerosmith here. When you get introduced to that character, I love that introduction. I love that menacing aspect of that character, that menacing factor that he brings to the story. That eventually changes along the way for me. I'm not sure if that was the original intention of how the character was supposed to be handled as the story progressed, but I do remember thinking that because of Andy getting a part in the Lord of the Rings, that he had to leave the next day and he had to shoot everything on that day before he left. I'm not sure if there were some last minute decisions that had to be made to be able to get what they need from him and then be able to put all the pieces together for the final cut here. And again, despite those changes that were made, I'm sure that were very much made on the spot, it still turned out okay with how the character was used, but I just didn't like the way how the character was handled. I'm going to say halfway through the story, because once you got that buildup from this character and how you perceive him to be, it kind of changed along the way that just didn't click for me all that well. But again, I'm not sure if that was, if it's because of the last minute news of him getting the part in Lord of the Rings that made those changes to turn out the way they did for the movie, just to be able to kind of close everything out properly, especially for that character. It didn't click all that well for me. Rachel Weisz's character, I liked her character a lot. I really did like her character a lot, for the reasons that, because Rachel does a really good job, in my opinion, in having delivered a really strong, powerful performance in this film. There are some subtle things you get to see about this character that you realize there's a lot of darkness about her, that it's not in the same vein as the character of Russell, played by Andy, but there's something about her darkness that really, it brings more or less the reality of the story that I thought worked very well for this film, and it's actually pretty consistent with what I felt like worked well for the movie. There was one part of the film, one part of the character that I honestly didn't really, I'm not gonna say I didn't care for, but it didn't work for me all that well. I'm not sure that was intentional for her character to be used that way in certain respects, but there's a certain bantering back and forth that she has with another character in this movie, which I won't reveal because that is part of the spoiler here. But that banter she kind of has back and forth in certain sequences did not work for me at all. Not because Rachel didn't do a good job in delivering that performance. I'm not saying that. She did a great job. It's just the inconsistency of the character that I felt was there that we got that I thought worked very effectively when her being this delivering this really masterful performance in those more dramatic beats that we saw from her. But when it came to some of the more bantering comedic aspects that she has with another character, didn't really work all that well for me. Not saying that she was terrible, she was great, but just didn't work for me personally. But Rachel's performance overall in this film I thought was really good. She's actually, I think in my opinion, she's really the secret ingredient to this film, along with Tom Holland, of course. I will also want to point out too about the way the film ends. Again, without getting to spoilers here, I wasn't a huge fan of the way the film ended. I understand the reason for that, and it was actually quite good. But again, I'm sure a lot of it had to do with the fact of the limited time to get to that point, that you needed the extra days for them to be able to tell the story and flesh out certain story beats to be able to get from point A to point B, but do it in a way that would be able to make more sense rather than having feel rushed in a lot of ways. I think that this movie, despite the issue that I had with the ending still works for me. If that makes any sense. It really still does work very well, but the setup to that ending was a little lackluster for me to a certain point. There are other things along the way too that happens with certain characters that I just wasn't all so hot on about how they were handled, because I thought that everyone had done a really good job with the performance, and clearly the time was an issue that I'm sure some decisions were made that had to be decided to go about with certain characters on the way. So I hope I'm not going too much on a tangent here about this, but I hope you understand where I'm coming from, especially when you watch the movie. So I'm not trying to say that the movie is not good by any means. It's still a good film, but those were the flaws that I noticed that stuck out for me, and I felt like it's just because of the timing. That I really do believe a lot of it does have to do with that, because overall the story is still good, the performances are great in my opinion, and there were a lot of wonderful aspects of the film that I did enjoy a great deal. And despite the fact that this isn't my favorite of Brett's movies that he's done, I will say that it's a film that I think it needs to be looked at more thoroughly for people to understand what they were dealt with, how it turned out, and give the respects about what they were able to pull off here, and still telling a pretty cohesive story, I would think, for the most part, that I thought it'd be entertaining. So for me, that's going to be the end of my negatives. So now let's get into my rating. What's interesting for me about the rating for this movie is that I remember after watching the film for the first time when I bought it on DVD, the first reading that came to mind was that it's worth a shot. Like it's not my favorite. It's still good, but it's not a film I feel like I want to go back to often. But even learning about what they had done to make this film and turn out the way that it did, I couldn't help but think that, but you got to give these guys credit, because it still was a very much engaging story, at least for me personally. It's not a perfect film by any means. It's not the most entertaining movie I've ever seen, but it definitely is a good film, because there's a lot of strong elements about this movie in terms of storytelling, the directing, the writing, the acting, the production design, and the cinematography, among other things as well too, that it's all going over my head right now. But everyone I think that worked on this movie did do a really good job in telling, I would think, a pretty entertaining story. So for me, my rating had changed from going from worth a shot to now I'll raise a glass. And those are my thoughts on the film. If you have seen the movie, let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. The movie is available for free on Tubi, and I'll make sure to have the link in the description down below for you guys to check out the film. And as I mentioned before, this movie is available right now on DVD. You can buy it at Walmart. I say support these guys, because these guys really do have a lot of great projects, especially some of the ones that are coming out later this year over with B22, all under Brett Bemme here. I'm excited to see what they all have coming down here, because there are some things that I've learned along the way that everyone's working on here, that I am extremely excited to see what their take on these certain genres they're working on here, and what they're going to be doing to make a fun, entertaining movie. And as cliche as it sounds as I'm talking about this here, but I really do mean that. I'm really excited to see what everyone in B22 is working on right now, and I can't wait to see all these upcoming projects they have coming down for this year, because they have a lot of stuff in the works right now that it's really, really exciting stuff that I cannot wait to check out. I'm hoping that more people become aware of what they're able to pull off here, because They've got some amazing set of work out there that I think some people will really enjoy, that I highly recommend you guys all check out here. But if you haven't done so already, make sure you guys subscribe to the channel and make sure you share and like the videos and hit the notification bell while you're down there. And follow us on our social media accounts on Instagram, New Release Wednesdays, on Facebook, Nerds Rule the World, and on Twitter at the NRW. Follow me on my social media accounts on Instagram and Twitter, Mr. Rob Medina, and on Facebook, simply just Rob Medina. And I have a show on the channel called You're So Cool with Rob Medina, and you can follow the show's social media accounts on Instagram, You're So Cool with Rob Medina, and on Twitter, You're So Cool WRM. And I want to thank you all very much for joining me here today. I hope you guys enjoyed the review, and until next time, stay safe out there, and cheers.